what's up you guys, this is Rob from The Gay Guy Plays, and today on the Daily Grind, oh my god, I am still reeling over DevStream 98, and this time we are going to be chatting about the new glass frame. So as many of us have already predicted, the glass frame will be available in the plains of Eidolon and will be released via a quest. The one thing that many of us did not predict, however, including me and a good chunk of people in my comment section, is how fucking good the model turned out. Holy shit, had doubts in my mind. I was like, this is looking kind of rough. And you know what? That was the truth. She was looking quite rough when we first saw her, but now she has cleaned her act up. I'm not sure if it has to do with the glass armor being tintable now, or the fact that they swapped the alt helmet for the primary helmet, but Jesus, she looks fucking good. And I mean, if you look at the model itself, like, it's a really nice juxtaposition, because on one hand she's got a lot of metals on her. She looks like she's really kind of like heavily armored, but she's also got this really ornate kind of like delicate armor that sits on top of that, you know. She's really bulky in some parts, but she's also got like a skirt and heels, and I'm like, I really like the contrast between the two, and she looks like an absolute badass with that mesa stance. I don't know if they just slipped that in there because, you know, a lot of people look good in the mesa stance, but I would definitely approve. I thought she was absolutely fantastic. And what's really interesting too, and this is something that I'm crossing my fingers over, because I really didn't think that the glass would be that much of an improvement when they made it tintable, but it did. So I'm kind of wondering if the effects of her glass abilities will be tintable with that as well, because there are a couple abilities that definitely need a little bit of tinting. So let's go ahead and jump straight into the abilities. Starting off, we have her passive, which is currently being named as Glint. Now keep in mind that this is just in the works. This isn't actually the finalized variation, but they did state that in bright lights she would have a percentage chance to blind enemies in her area, which I think is really, really cool. Very, very creative, and not necessarily something that I would have thought of for a glass frame myself. You know what I mean? There's like, I would have thought shredding or something with like slash damage, but you know, very creative, coming out of left field with it, and I kind of like it. The one thing we did not hear about at all, and I'm going to address this right now because I'm a little bit bitter. I feel a little bit misled. I feel like all of the kids on Reddit talking about Zeneric right now. Trust me, I know. I'm feeling a bit betrayed, because where is her big glass hammer? Her glass hammer is nowhere to be seen in her kit whatsoever, and they had chatted about it at TennoCon, and I was expecting her to come out here with this big old crazy mallet. Regardless, she still does come off very interesting. She gets a glass sword of sorts with her first ability, which is got the placeholder name Shank. And this one is very interesting to me because I'm like, I don't know how good it's gonna be. She sends out this kind of like glass, I want to say like a glass beam, and it like basically hardens into this big sword. The longer that she channels it, the longer that the glass actually extends forward, and any enemies caught in there are dealt damage and also held in place if they stay alive. Now, part of me is like, how long are we going to be holding this out for to keep enemies in place for it to be a really feasible CC? I mean, the only way I could really think about it is if you've got like enemies pathing a certain direction and you just stand in front of them, you're like, hey, and you're like, poof, gotcha! And I think that would be kind of like a fun way, but it does have really cool synergy with her fourth ability. But let's go ahead and move on to her second one before we go ahead and jump the gun. Alright, so her second ability is called Shatter, or at least that's the placeholder name for it, and basically what it does is it shatters her armor, and it causes it to swirl in an area of effect around her, or a targeted ally, or a targeted enemy. Now, what this seems to be is, I'm assuming it's either a toggle or a timed toggle, because when Rebecca used it initially, it had a very short duration, so it looks like she activated it and deactivated it, but if you pay attention to the footage, the second run that she had it on for a lot longer. So it might either be a toggle or something like Mirage's Prism, which has a max duration on it, but it can also be toggled off early to save some energy. I think this one is very, very smart, and I want to see how the damage scales on this and what damage type it is, because legitimately being able to place it on herself, or, you know, if you've got an ally that's like charging in and you don't necessarily have all of the health in the world, and you're like, hey, why don't you deal the area of effect damage for me, you crazy person running around with your exalted blades or your rhino charges or whatever. I think that's really creative, or actually putting it on an Eximus unit would be really, really cool too, because any enemies that got too close to it, it would end up shredding. Maybe even an ancient healer. That would be kind of like, Wait, actually I think enemies within the Ancient Healer's aura that die heal the Ancient Healer, so maybe not a good idea. We're gonna pass on that one, but I think it's a really cool way of handling the ability and making it so that the glass frame itself doesn't necessarily have to sit in the middle of a pool of enemies to deal its damage, right? Smart thinking. Moving on to the next ability, this one is called Fragment, and this one is very interesting. I'm really not sure how this one is going to work, and I want to see how it plays out, but basically it creates a bunch of these mirror-like decoys in a specified area, and enemies that will be attracted to those, and they will try to fight the mirrors, but instead they'll be dealing damage to themselves. So think about it almost kind of like Mesa's Shatter Shield or Chroma's Ice Tank form, but in a place. In a movable place. So basically what happens is when enemies attack it, they will be dealing damage back to themselves, and after enough of the mirrors have been destroyed, the entire thing will collapse and deal area of effect damage. Now this one, I'm hoping, dear sweet baby Jesus, I'm hoping scales with the damage that it absorbs. I'm crossing my fingers that the mirrors will shatter, so that way if you're taking it into high level missions and these and these mirror things are being shattered fairly quickly, that they will be able to kind of go ahead and put that damage back out into the enemies. And again, I'm crossing my fingers for that slash damage or a slash proc, so at least it kind of helps scale. And this is kind of very interesting because I feel like she's gonna be an area of effect, almost like defensive offensive kind of character. I'm really waiting on the stats because that's definitely one of the things that is going to basically create what her playstyle is gonna be like. Right now they said that none of her stats, nothing that you see on the screen is actually finalized. It's just what the abilities and mechanics actually are, but not necessarily the numbers itself. And I'm crossing my fingers that she's kind of tanky, at least a little bit tanky. Please, a little bit more than Hydroid Prime. I'd like to see that. Now her final ability is very interesting, and if we take a look at the model itself, actually, before we move on, so those mirrors, if you notice, the mirrors on Fragment, sorry, we're jumping around a little bit, we're going backwards, but the mirrors have a frame around it. So I'm crossing my fingers that that frame will be tintable by your armor. Now, if DE hasn't necessarily always done that in the past, like we've seen with Vauban Prime's balls not being gold. I'm like, hello, come on, it's Vauban Prime, let us tint his balls. So I'm crossing my fingers that they let us tint the glass frames on Fragment. Crossing my fingers for that, as well as the rest of the glass that appears on all of her abilities. Please make it a thing, it would be beautiful. But let's move on to her last ability with the placeholder name of Ring, and this one is very interesting and may kind of define her as what her ability is, where she stands in the group, because it's supposedly, and we're gonna break it down at its base, is that it's a mix between Frost's Snow Globe and Nova's Molecular Prime, both very iconic abilities, so I'm crossing my fingers that this totally works out. But basically what happens is when she casts the ability, she actually begins to channel, and she sends a wave outwards, kind of like Molecular Prime sends a wave, and it's a wave of this molten glass. Any enemies that are caught in that molten glass as they kind of come in and pass through it will be slowed to a crawl until they harden and completely stop. After she's done casting it, it almost creates this barrier. Now, a part of me is thinking, because they said snow globe, that barrier is going to be impenetrable to projectiles, and that any enemies crossing into it will also become molten, or maybe it'll just be like a hardcore barrier that enemies just can't get through. That's definitely the question that I'm asking myself right now, because if you look at the actual kind of lighting or the effect of the glass itself, the glass still looks like it's emanating warmth off of it. So if you look very closely, it's still got a little bit of a red tinge. And that's a follow at 12 midnight. But anyway, I think it's a really cool ability because it almost kind of it's almost kind of like a double ability, because what you can do first and foremost, it's CC, so you can slow enemies and bring them to a stop, but at the same time you can lay down your shatter in the middle of it, and then go ahead and cast your ring outwards. So what happens is all of those mirrors are going to attract enemy attention, and any enemies that come towards those mirrors will have to pass through the molten glass field of ring, and they'll be stopped in place, which I think is pretty gosh darn cool. I think that's a really, really cool little synergy that they've got there. Now, another synergy that works with the ring is actually after the ring has been put into place, you can shatter the ring using your Shank ability, and it's supposed to deal directional damage. Now, they said specifically directional damage, so I'm not 100% sure whether they mean like directional in the direction that you're casting Shank, as in you shank it and then all of the glass shatters and they deal damage like in a line in front of you, or maybe they mean directional damages and you shatter it and the glass shatters outwards or something along those lines. But they did say that you would be able to shatter it to do bonus damage. All in all, I think the kit is really, really interesting. I want to see the finalized stats for it, because that's really what's going to make or break this. I definitely want to see some scaling in there, because there are some abilities that just like, they scream like we should be able to scale. Kind of like Shatter, which is the, Shatter is the one that is the armor shattering, which should be able to do slash damage, and I'm crossing my fingers, some slash procs in there. And same thing goes for Fragment, because, you know, it takes damage. It's a decoy that takes damage. It absorbs the damage. It should be able to put that damage back out to the enemies. So that I'm very, very excited about. And I really want to see Ring in action. I want to know if it ends up working like Snow Globe. The interesting thing about it is it literally creates a ring. So enemies that come in from the top will still be able to attack you, and this is kind of like one of the pluses that I see of Ring. One of the things that bothers me so much about Snow Globe is the fact that we can't fire into it. However, if it's literally just kind of like a ring-sized barrier that's about Warframe height, you can easily do a parkour jump and fire into the ring, and you'll be totally fine. So that seems like definitely like a little bonus plus for me, something that I'm really excited about for the ring. Oh, not the ring, like that movie terrified me. Okay, regardless, I'm gonna leave it there for you guys. Let me know how you feel about the glass frames model, because legitimately for me, I'm absolutely drooling over it. I think it's kind of like one of those, it sounds so cheesy, but it's like one of those makeover movies where, you know, the girl starts out with like frizzy hair and glasses, which, by the way, glasses are still, just because you have glasses doesn't mean you're ugly. I like people in glasses. I dated many men in glasses. And then all of a sudden, you know, they condition her hair and they give her some contacts and do her makeup, and they're like, oh, wow, I didn't know that was under there. And that's exactly how I felt about Glassroom. I was like, you look real good though, girl. So let me know how you feel about her model. Tell me how you feel about her kit. Are there any things that you're excited about? Are there any things that you're kind of like, looking side-eye about? Or are there any things that you're looking side-eye about and they might be able to kind of like tweak just a little bit? Okay, we're talking about baseline tweak. We're not talking about like completely changing the ability for you, but we're, you know, baseline. Let me know how you feel about all of that in the comments below. And as always, love somebody, hurt nobody, and touch your body. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.